Alright, hello again. So this is a video about responsive design. So we're going to talk about what responsive design is, look at a couple of examples and places you can see examples. We'll talk about its advantages and disadvantages a little bit. We'll look at some frameworks that use or help you design with responsive design, which you may have already heard about, Bootstrap and Foundation. And then we'll talk about the main principles of kind of the backbone of responsive design. The viewport meta tag, which you need to use to make the page show up the right size on your mobile device. A flexible grid with breakpoints. Media queries, which allow you to change the look of a page depending on what device and how wide the viewport is, what device you're using. And then responsive images, we'll probably look at that in a different video. We'll see if we get to that, but we'll also cover eventually responsive images. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So just wanted to show you a few things that you could, resources you can use for responsive design. So I mentioned Bootstrap and Foundation. So Bootstrap is a very common, we've probably already seen it before in some other videos, common CSS framework or library, if you want to think of it that way, that you can use to make web pages with. And a lot of Bootstrap has to do with responsive design. So if you click on, I'm on the CSS section of Bootstrap here, and if I click on the grid system section here, and then I look down a little bit, you can see that they give you all these options to make different, make your content span different numbers of columns, basically, depending on what kind of device you're looking at. Small devices or tablets, extra small devices, medium devices, large devices, etc. And then you can basically say how many columns out of 12, it's a 12-column system. How many columns out of 12 do I want that column to be? So you could have it a full width if it's 12 or half if it's 6 and so on. Here's kind of what it looks like. These are 1-column columns. These are 8. Here's an 8 and a 4. It all adds up to 12. It's a 12-column system. You can also nest it. But we'll get that. Here's a 4 and a 4 and a 4. That's 12. Here's 2 6s. That's 12. And then if we resize the page, eventually they collapse into single-column views. So that's kind of the idea with responsive design, is you get the best view for the content at a specific, usually it has to do with the browser width or the device width. So that is Bootstrap. It's free. It was developed by Twitter, and you can download it, and we'll definitely look at it in some other videos if we haven't already. Their main competitor for this kind of thing is Foundation. Foundation is from Zurb, which is I think based in Campbell, California, not far from Mission College, and they do the same kind of thing, and they have a framework called Foundation that you can download, and it does a lot of the same stuff. And it has columns and buttons and things. It has much more than just responsive design stuff. It has lots of stuff, but just wanted to show you that. As far as you can see examples on the web, there's all kinds of responsive web design examples and galleries and things on the web. This one's called responsive design.is examples, and you can see different websites and how they kind of adjust depending on what kind of device they're being looked at. This one's a pretty well-known one, mediaquery.es, like media queries. Get it? It's media queries. Kind of a joke, I guess. Pun. But it shows you lots of different websites and how they, lots of different responsive websites. So again, the idea is you have one look for desktop, maybe 1 or 2 looks for sort of tablet views, and then 1 look for a phone, which is sort of a vertical view. What you end up doing, to be honest, is basically taking the columns that are in the desktop and maybe tablet views and then stacking them vertically in the phone view. That is mostly what you're doing. You're doing some other stuff too, but that's basically it. You can see a lot of times we're going from 4 columns down to 1 column, 3 columns down to 1 column, that kind of thing. So there are some examples there. As far as books, to help with that, the original book kind of got this whole thing going around in 2011, I think, was Responsive Web Design by Ethan Marcotte. He's the guy who coined the term responsive design, and it's a very pretty simple book. Short books for web designers, these kind of a book apart books. And I think this is the second edition that we're looking at here. So they update that book too, and he kind of talks about the different principles, the flexible grid and flexible images and things like that. So that's a good one. Another one is that I think is pretty good. It's called Mobile First by Luke Wroblewski, I think. And this one's kind of about basically the philosophy of responsive design. So when responsive design came out, or even before, when we're trying to make mobile websites, what people would do is they take these large desktop designs and try to squish them down so they would fit on a phone, which doesn't really work. You can't have all the same stuff, obviously, that you have on this page on a little phone view, and why would you want to? So the idea behind Mobile First is start with the mobile view, the phone view, if you want to think of it that way, and then build up from there. That way you start with the most important information is going to be on the phone, and then you can sort of add stuff and then end up with larger, more comprehensive websites. Well, not even more comprehensive, just you're starting with the important stuff when you're looking at the phone view, and that's kind of the way it should be. And you should be thinking about it that way anyway, because more and more access to websites is through the mobile view, through a phone usually, or a phablet or a tablet, as opposed to desktop. And it's just going, phones are going like this, tablets or desktops going like this. That's supposed to be a graph that I just did with my cursor. Phone access of websites is going up. Desktop is going to fall away as we move towards just people like to access stuff on their phones because they have their phones with them. A lot of people have smartphones and they don't have computers now, and that's trend is continuing. So anyway, so that's just some resources that you can use to kind of study up on the responsive design. There's tons of stuff on the internet about that too. Okay, so what we're going to do is create a design that has 3 views, and this is just a quick wireframe that I did in Balsamiq or My Balsamiq. So here's what it's going to look like on our phone view. We've got a header, an article, which is our main content, and a side, which is sort of related information, and then a footer at the bottom. And then when we see it on a tablet view, it's going to be a header, and then the article is going to be a little bit of wider. It's a 2-column view this time instead of 1. This would be 1 column, right? We've got a 2-column view, and the article is going to be wider than the aside, and then we've got the footer again. Very common layout, right? And then on the really wide view, the desktop view, we're going to have a header and a footer still, but this time the article, to keep the line lengths from getting so long, we're going to break it up into 2 columns. So now the article itself has 2 columns inside of the article area, and then the aside is still over here on the right side, and then we've got the footer at the bottom. So when you're doing this responsive design stuff, you should definitely plan ahead as far as like what you want to happen. If you just tried to make a design and say, well, I'm going to make it responsive, and you don't know what you're going to want to end up with as far as like having a nice wireframe or something like this to look at or reference, it's going to be a mess. So you definitely have to plan ahead a little bit. So that's what we're going to do. Another thing to notice is I think we'll probably get to the images, like I said, the responsive images in another video. The other thing we're ignoring is navigation. There's no navigation on this page, and we'll probably do that in a separate video as well, just to keep this one manageable. This one might be pretty long as it is. Feel free to take a break, have a cup of coffee in the middle. Yeah, have fun. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. So I mentioned that one of the things you need to, let me bring that back here. One of the things you need to think about is this viewport meta tag. What does that mean? Well, that's going to go up here in the top of our page, and it is a way to make the page display correctly on a phone. So your phones, lots of phones are set up to, if you have a small web page or a large web page, it scales the whole thing, and then you end up having to pinch and zoom and that kind of thing. So to prevent that, you can add this meta tag. So I'm just going to add meta here, and you're going to add this along with me. So we're basically going to do this as hand coding if we, yeah, it's just be a little more convenient. Yes, I forgot to show you what we're doing here. So if you go to your files, you'll get these from me probably. I'm going to open the finished page and show you what it looks like. So here's the finished page, and if I preview that in Firefox, it looks like this. So here's the page. We have a header and a footer, obviously. This is the wide view with our article over here and our aside over here. And as we get smaller, see that we had a breakpoint. So a breakpoint is the different points in the layout when the layout changes for different, usually browser widths, like I said. So here's our wide view, right, with the article over here and the aside over here, and it's 2 columns in the article right now. And then as we get smaller, the article breaks into 1 column. That's sort of our tablet view. And then eventually, when we get to the next breakpoint, boom, it goes to 1 column, sort of a stacked view. And you notice the header got smaller, so it takes up less space. So now we're in the mobile view, which is just basically all stacked. So you kind of, the mobile first idea is you start with this sort of well marked up, logically tagged document, and it's basically going to be a vertical document, kind of like an old school website. And then as it gets larger, it adapts to its environment. So now we've got this 2 column thing with the article over here and the aside over here, and now we've got a 3 column thing, but just the article itself has been broken into 2 columns to make it look that way. And of course, you don't have to do that, but that's our example. We're going to do that. But you definitely don't have to have 2 columns in that area. You could probably have 1 column. It might be a little long, but it'd probably be okay. All right, so that is what we are going to make. The file that we actually are opening up to start with is responsive web design start 1. That is this file here, which we're looking at here. It already has a couple of CSS files linked to it. One is normalize.css, which we probably talked about. That one is basically a CSS reset file to get everything to look the same on a lot of different browsers. And there's also responsive one start.css. That one has some basic styles that you're going to start with, such as the body, font, the colors, and a center, class, some other tags for figures and things that we probably aren't even going to use in this. And then there's one for the footer, background color, and the header, and things like that. So we're just going to add on to this. And that's another part of the mobile first idea, is you start out with the tags that you're going to use, and then you just let the mobile version be itself, in that you don't try to start to design the desktop version and then take things out. You start with the mobile version and add things in. That way, another benefit of that is that it's doing less computing and less work, because it's just using the basic styles for the mobile version, which we already have. This is already the mobile version is there. There it is, the mobile version. It's already stacked. So we just have to make it work at the other 2 breakpoints that we decided to have. Okay, so back to our meta tag. So here is we're going to stick our meta tag. It's meta name equals viewport. You see that Dreamweaver, we're doing this in Dreamweaver, so it's completing some of this for us. Content equals, and this is kind of a weird one, it's width equals device width. And yeah, I'm not typing it right. Device dash width. So it's content, that could all be in one line. Let me make this a little smaller. We're looking at the mobile view, so we can make it as small as we want. This is meta name equals viewport, content equals width equals device width, and then we put a comma in there, right there, and then we're going to say initial dash scale equals 1. So that's the zoom, kind of, and that should be it. Let me make sure that looks right. So it's meta name equals viewport, content equals width equals device width. That should be a comma. Is that yeah, there we go, comma, and then initial. That is definitely not how you spell initial. Bad typing already. Initial dash scale equals 1. Probably should put a space in there. There we go. All right, I think that is good. So what again that will do is it will tell the phone not to zoom out on the design, basically. So it's real small. It'll look normal sized. If you leave that out, you could have some issues with certain phones, or trying to show you the full website or even the mobile view, but it's really zoomed out, so it's really small and you have to pinch and zoom and stuff like that. So that's what that does. And you can use that basically on any responsive web design to force it to scale correctly when you're looking at it in your mobile browser. Okay, so that's that. All right, so the next part is we're going to go down and start adding in some things that we need. So again, we're going to take this. If we look at this, we've got a bunch of sections. Let me just show you what the page looks like. We've got a wrapper around everything. That's our main container. Then we've got our header here. We've got our article here. The article covers 1, 2, 3, 4 different sections. The sections, you can see these little lines around it in this design view in Dreamweaver. So each of these is a section. There's the first section. Here, way down here is the second section. Or maybe I skipped one, but you get the idea. So there's 4 sections there. And then this stuff here is in the aside. So that's the end of the article, which is the main content. That kind of makes sense, right? The main content for our page. The sides are supposed to be sort of related information, but not the main content. And that has responsive inline image stuff in it, responsive background images, and some books and resources. So 3 sections in that one. All right. So let's go ahead and get going with this. So if we go back up to the top, what we want to do is we want to add some styles for the wrapper, since it's our outside container. So I'm going to go to responsive one start here and go to the bottom of my rules here, and then just add one for wrapper. So the wrapper class is already on a div that's around everything. So as soon as I type dot and then W, you'll see it's already got wrapper there. And we already have a style for the sections, which is the padding that's already in there. So some of that stuff is already in there. All right, so here's our wrapper. A wrapper, we want to make the width be 95%. So again, this is the defaults that we're going to have. And then basically what you're going to do is use media queries to override this stuff for different widths. I want to say max width of 1200, just because for my design and my preferences, I don't want it to go bigger than that. So it's basically going to stop at 1200 pixels. You could do a design for bigger, more width, but that's pretty big. So I'm going to stop, especially for my content that I have. Kind of depends on your content a little bit too. I want to center this thing. So that's margin 0 auto. We've seen that one before probably. I'm going to put a small border on it. Partly so I can see what's going on, and partly just to delineate it from the background a little bit. So I'm going to say 1 pixel solid, and we don't care what color it is. Let's just do a gray. We're not pretending to be picky about colors and things, since we're mostly talking about layout here. So that is it for the wrapper there. Oh, we want to do padding of 0. So we're going to set the padding of the wrapper to 0. So let's see what that looks like so far. Here's our page, and as soon as we get out there, nothing is happening. Do we have a wrapper? No, we didn't apply that yet. It doesn't look like. So let me go to the source code. I'm going to be jumping around here a little bit, so feel free to pause and figure out what we're looking at here. We do have a class of wrapper. So here's our class of wrapper, and you know what it is? That's because I didn't save this. I'm in my responsive one start. Go ahead and save that file. So I'm saving responsive one start.css, and now if I preview it, I think it'll be okay. So that is one little thing about the Dreamweaver previews. I'm using temporary previews as well that you can set in preferences, but if you're using an external style sheet, oftentimes you got to save that style sheet to have it show up, even if it's a temp preview. So here now we've got it. So we've got our border there, and you can see it is going to stop. I think, yeah, there it stopped at 1200 pixels wide. Just because we don't want, I don't think for this design we need one that's wider than that. That's pretty wide. Okay, so that is good right there. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to add a media query for our next size up. Okay, so where are we doing that? Well, we want to break this aside and the article into 2 columns. Remember the example in the wireframes and in the finished file? We had the article on the left and the aside on the right. So we're going to add a media query. So I'm going to go down below this wrapper tag or wrapper rule that we added, and I'm going to add my media query. Let me move this down so you guys can see it a little bit better maybe. So media query looks like this. It's at media. And then in parentheses, we're going to say min width colon 768 pixels. So that's a common breakpoint used for for displays that are 1024 by 768. So that means that's our breakpoint. That's when our design, we want it to change at that point. And basically it's the width of an original iPad or iPad mini. That's about what it is. So you put at media min width 768, and then we put a curly brace, and then we put another curly brace down here. So the way this works is everything that we put in here, this is sort of like an if-then-else statement or a test for different types of media and devices and things. So what we're saying here is we want this, all these styles that are between this opening curly brace, this one here, and this one, to only work when the minimum width of our viewport is 768. So that means anything below 768, these are not going to work. So we're just going to have our default styles, which we already have, which we already like, right? It's just stacked up in a vertical one-column thing. We want to make two columns when it's above 768. So the minimum width for this media query to work is 768 pixels. So when the width of our browser gets to 769, anything between these brackets will start to work. So it's almost like having styles that aren't turned on until this is satisfied. The minimum width of our viewport basically is 768. We'll probably look at a different video maybe, or maybe you've already seen it, about media queries in general, but that's basically what this one means, is that these rules will not take effect, all these, until we get to 768 pixels. All right, so what are we going to do here? We're going to change the font size to make it slightly larger in our header. So that's a good example of something we can see that happens with media queries. So I'm going to say header H1. And you see that we have two sets of brackets, right? So here's our opening media query bracket. Here's the closing one. All of our rules for this media query go in there. They're regular old rules inside of here. So it is a little confusing, kind of like nested rules a little bit. So I'm going to say font size of 2EM. Okay, so that's that. So let's take a look. I'm going to go change to live view here, and here's our live view in the browser. And then if I move that scrubber, this is the scrubber here in Dreamweaver. That's what this is for. It's to scrub different media widths. And if I drag here, see when I get to a 768, you can even see it right up here, this little purple bar. When I get to 768, the text gets bigger and the header gets bigger because of the padding on the header. So the padding gets bigger along with the heading because of the way I set it up. But there's an example of a media query at work. Down here, the size is the size we were already using. When we get past that media query, the size of the heading gets bigger because we changed it right there. And this allows me to show you too, and we'll do a different video, or maybe you've seen one already, about how to do media queries, visual media queries in Dreamweaver. We're going to type these in by hand, like I said today, or for this video. But here's the media query up here. It shows you, it says 768, and it's got an arrow pointing to the right. That means that we're inside this purple media query here. Another thing, another side that we're not going to look at too much in this video, but just to show you what's going on, if I open the CSS Designer and I look at media here, you see there's global styles here listed, and then there's the media query right there. There's the one we just made, header 1. So that's what this part of the CSS Designer panel is for media queries. So there's our min width 768, the one that we wrote by hand, right there. It shows up in the CSS Designer panel as well. So there's a good little help for that. And like I said, we'll look again later at the media queries in Dreamweaver specifically, but we're pretending that we're just hand coding this because we kind of are. All right, so that's we changed the size of that heading 1 inside of the header. So now we're going to do the really kind of important stuff here. We're going to go down here and add the article selector, and I can add it as a plain article selector because I only have one article in there. If I had more, I'd have to use a class or an ID or something, but I only have one article tag on this whole page, which actually is kind of a good idea because that's the main content. And then I don't have to, so I don't have to use anything but this article here. All right, so we're going to give a little bit of background color so we can sort of show how by using the color, the main content kind of area. And again, I'll just kind of pick a random color. We're not going to worry about if I can get this to show up. Well, let's do it manually. Let's go FCC. It's pink, but whatever. So now our article will be pink when we get above that point again. So let's see if that works. Let me click out of this. I've got to move this over. There we go. You see how it changed? Yeah, that's pretty hideous, but I'm going to leave it that way just so it's obvious what's going on. Okay, it looks like I've got a little issue with this. Hold on just a second. I'm back. You didn't even miss me, huh? So I had that little helper code completion thing pop up and wouldn't go away, so I had to restart Dreamweaver. Fun times. Okay, so let's get back to what we're doing here. So we added that background color to the article. Actually, maybe I will change that a little bit. It's just a little too hideous. Let's go with CCC. And then, so maybe I'll change that again in a minute if it's a bad color. So we've got article there. What we really want to do is work with the width. So I'm going to say width of 56%. I kind of worked this out ahead of time, obviously, because I knew what I was going to do here. And then I want to float this to the left. So we're making columns again. And I want to add box sizing of border box. And the reason I'm doing that is because it will make it, at least for this video, and it's used it quite a bit now. Remember that the size, this width, includes the content by default. It includes the content, the padding, and the border. So you could have a problem where if your columns added up to over 100% with all of that, of the paddings and content and the borders and things, you could get the floats to drop down below. So what this means is when you say box sizing border box, now the content and the padding and the border are all in this 56%. So the only thing that's not in the 56 is the margin. So it makes it a little easier to calculate the sizes of floats and things like that. And then I'm going to add a little bit, so that's why I did that. I'm going to add a tiny bit of margin on the right, and this is just going to be space between the two columns, let's say 2%. And then we should add up to a total of 100% for our article and our side. So if I look what that looks like, you can see if I drag that out, it's already starting to work. So as soon as I get to 768, the article itself goes to the left, and the aside is sort of slipping into the empty space there. It doesn't have a width yet, but we're going to add one. Yeah, and then you can also see some weird stuff is happening. The footer is now slipping up around that floated object, and that's where you need to use a clear, which we will get to in a minute. All right, so that's good. It's kind of going well, and then we're going to go down here and add aside. And the aside is going to be same kind of stuff, except we're just going to add the width to it. So we'll add a width, and we're going to add 42%. So if we add this up, right, 56, 58 plus 42 is 100. It adds up to 100. So that's where we want to use this box sizing border box again, so we don't have to worry about any padding or anything in the box changing the width of the box. So it'll be 42 no matter what, except for the margin. And then we want to float it to the left, so it sits next to the article. So we're going to float that to the left, so we can just stack up our floats left to right. And again, you got to kind of be familiar with floats pretty well on this. You can look at some of the older videos if you have issues with that, and you can kind of brush up on that stuff if you need to. So now it looks like this. The footer has gone crazy. It's leapt up to the top, I think. That's why we've got that gray background. I think that's what's going on. So this brings up another point, is that now we need to make sure that since we're floating things, we have to clear things to get out of the float situation. So how do we do that? Well, what we can do is we can use what's called the clear fix. So this doesn't go inside the media query because this is something that we can use quite a few times in different situations. And this is sort of another category of coding, which is the clear fix, but it's important for this one, so we'll throw it in here. So we're going to say, I'm going to make a class called row. So it's dot row. And then we're going to put after, a semicolon and after. So what does that mean? That means, and again, this is outside of my media queries here. I'm just up at the top in my regular, it doesn't really matter where you put this. It's just up in my regular styles. So it says dot row after. This means something has a class, and the after is a pseudo element. So what the after pseudo element does is it will generate whatever's in between. I'll show you in a second when I type this in, but it'll generate this object basically. So somebody smart, wasn't me, figured out that you could use this after pseudo element to make little elements that won't show up, but they end up clearing all your floats. So how would we do this normally? We could go down and put on the footer, we could put clear both on the footer and it would get it out of this floats. We could do it that way, which is how people, and it still works, you could do it that way. You'd add clear both to the footer and it would be okay. But this is another way to do it, and basically we're making things auto clear. And I threw this in as a row, as a class called row, because a lot of the frameworks conveniently, coincidentally, use a row class for that kind of thing. You might also see group, but basically if you want a number of elements that are all floated and you want to have them self-clear, meaning that the elements that follow won't try to go around them and go up inside of them, then you can use this sort of thing here. So the way this works is we put in the content, and the content is empty. So it's two quotes with nothing in between. So there's basically nothing in there. Sometimes you'll see with a space. I'm not sure if it makes much difference, but I'm going to leave it empty. And I think it'll work anyway. So that is what's going to be generated. Something that has a content of nothing. Okay, does that help anything? Not really yet, but it will. So we're going to say display and then table. And I haven't found good documentation about why this is currently the favored thing to use as far as how to make it display, but I believe it relates to that tables basically take the size of their content. So if the size of the content is nothing, because we have nothing in this thing, it's basically a invisible table, a sort of phantom table. So this will generate sort of a phantom element that acts like a table, and tables stack up like block elements, so that's also what we want. We want something to be underneath those elements and help to clear them. I know it's complicated, it's tricky, but it works, so we'll use it. And then the part that actually clears it is to clear both things, same as we would have done on the footer, but now we're making a self-clearing element that's kind of auto-generated. So we'll say clear both here. And there we go. So how do we make this work? We need to make a div around both of our floated elements that has this class on it. So that's where we have to go to the actual source code of the web page to do this. So where does this start? This is going to start right after the header. So we're going to go right after the header here before the article. And then we're going to add a div and then a class of, and you see that the row is already in there. Dreamweaver knows that I have a row class already. Good thing that thing went away this time. So that's where it starts. It's going to go all the way till the end of the aside here, which is down here at the end of books and resources. So if I select that, it'll kind of get me to that spot. Here's the end of aside. Here's the beginning of the footer. So we want that to be that pseudo sort of table element to be between this and the footer there, right down below that. So we're going to stick it right there. So that's it. So we added a div that goes basically around everything except the footer and the header. I could have said that. That might have been easier. Why did I say so many words in there? I don't know. So here it is. Here's the start of it after the header, and it ends right before the footer right there. All right, so let's see if that changed anything with the way things look. Let's go out here. I gotta move this. It's fixed. Check it out. So now, remember that was all gray up here because the footer was, because both of these were floated, they had no height that the footer was recognizing. So the footer was just like, well, okay, I'll go up here and I'll just be up underneath the header because there's nothing in there except for these floated elements, which I don't care about. Now there's a little phantom element in there between this div that's around all this and the footer, and that is making that sort of self-clear itself. That's pretty cool, right? So remember that technique. It's called clear fix. You can look it up. There's lots of different versions. Mine is pretty common, I think. So there you go. And you can use this whenever you want. Anytime you want have some floated elements and you want to get out of the floats, basically, start back over with normal flow, you just add this .row class to it, and it'll auto-generate this little empty table thing that has clear on it, and will get you out of the floats. So that's pretty cool, right? Okay, I think that is good for that part. So now we need to work on our, so let's see how that looks. Let me preview that. So here we go. We've got our mobile design is here. We left it alone, basically. It just has the default kind of typography and spacing and stuff. And obviously you could do a lot more with the styles, but we're kind of thinking about layout here. So there's our mobile look for our phones, right? We move out until we get to that first breakpoint, which happens at 768, and then it pops to a 2-column design. And we also made the heading bigger. So the heading got bigger at the top because we have more space. We can make a bigger heading, right? And now we have a 2-column design. Here's our article. Here's our aside. And then if we look down here at the bottom, the footer's still down there at the bottom. So we're good. So what we want to do now is make the next one where if we get real big, then this will break into 2 columns. We don't have to do that. Like I said, you could just use 2. Some people use 2 breakpoints. Some people use 3. Sometimes people use 4. I think 4 is a little bit crazy, but you could definitely do that. This is actually okay like this. But we're going to take it to the next level and add one more just to see how you would do that. So to do that, I need to add another media query for that next size up. So that one is going to be 1200 pixels. So I'm going to go below this media query that we did. I'm at around line 77, 78, something like that. And I'm going to be lazy and copy this one. Copy this and paste it right here. And except this time it's going to have, let me put the closing one in so I don't forget, that will break things. This one is going to take effect when we're at 1200 pixels wide. Pretty wide. Let's say 1100 so that you could see it happen a little bit more often, a little earlier. So at 1100 pixels wide, these new styles are going to take effect. So what we're going to do is make a class that will create 2 columns for us. How do we do that? This is kind of also similar to what happens with some of the frameworks as well, like Bootstrap and Foundation. They will have classes for like 6-column widths, which is basically half width. We're just going to make it a little more simpler and just call it a half width column. So we'll say half width column. And so we have half width column, and we want to make that 45% wide to leave some space for some margin or gutter between the columns. We want it to float left again. So again, we're making columns, so we're floating things to the left. You can float to the right too, but most people do left. We don't want to worry about our widths again with if we add padding or borders and things, we don't want it to break anything. So we're going to add box sizing of border box again, and that will prevent paddings and borders from breaking our total width of everything. So same thing we did before. And then we want to have a little bit of space between those 2 columns. So I'm going to add a margin just on the right of 5%. So I think that's good. I may change that margin, but we'll see if it looks okay. You'll get the idea. So how do we apply that? Well, now we have to apply some more divs to do this, right? So what we're going to do is put the first couple of sections inside of a div with this style on it. So the first 2 I think we're doing are responsive. This one with what is responsive design and how does responsive design work? And the second 2 will be these 2. So these are going to be the 2 columns. So I have to kind of look where that stuff is. So if I click over here and I go to my code, source code, if I click here, it should kind of take me to that spot. What is responsive design? Here it is right here. So here it is. This is the section. And it starts right here. So I want to go right after this header right here that says the basics of responsive design. And I want to add another div as a container for these two columns. So I'm going to say div, and then the class is going to be, and it's not showing up for some reason. Oh, you know why? Because I didn't save it. Let's go back over here. Half width column, save it. Go back to the source code. Now if I go class equals, still not showing up. Well, I guess I'll have to type it. I'll do all the work myself. Okay, so column, half width column, I think that's right. There. And let me make that a little bigger so you guys can see it better. All right, so we added a div around line 25 in my case, but maybe a little different on yours, with a class of half width column, which has to be the same as this. Make sure I got the name right. Half width column. Yeah. Okay. So now we've got that. So where does that end? That ends right down about here. So if I click there, if I click back over here, yeah, there it is. So after this section with how does responsive design work. So I'm going to add the closing div tag there. And again, if you're in Dreamweaver, if you type the bracket and the slash, it closes the div because it knows it's an open div, so it wants to close it for you. Then I'm going to add again on line 40. I'm going to copy this time. I'm going to add the same thing around the other two sections. So where is that? Here it is. Copy that. So we're starting the second half column, I'm calling it, right here. So it starts right before this media queries thing. So we're going to paste that. That's going to be our second column inside of our article. And then that one ends down, where does it end? Right before responsive inline images, I think. Right where mobile is important. So here is the end of the article too. So we want it to stay inside of the article. So it ends right before the end of the article. There we go. So now we've got two divs. One is around the first two sections, these two, and one is around these two, and then one is around media queries and mobile is important. So those are our two sections. And you have to kind of make it fit, and move things around maybe to make that work, but that should be okay. I'm going to go to File and Save All, because I don't want it to crash on me. And then if I preview this or look at it in the browser, let's see what happens. All right, here's our regular mobile design. I'm trying to drum up the tension so we see if it works. Then I go out a little bit and it snaps to our tablet design or medium-sized design with our two columns, right? And our articles over here and our aside is over there. And I keep going. Aha, it works. Check it out. Boom. There you go. Now our article split into two columns. So it makes the line lengths a little bit more manageable. They still have the color around it. This is the article, that's the background of the color. And our aside is still over on the right over there. And it's a little bit wide, to be honest with you, but I'm going to ignore that. Obviously, you could change the percentages a little bit. They just have to add up to 100, and then you would be okay. So I think that is good on that. Let's take a look back here. Actually, you know what I want to do? What I want to do is I don't really want to have this space over here. I want to take away some of that. So I'm going to show you another cool little trick to apply a style to the last child in a container. What does that mean? Let's do it. Just to see if we can make this move over. I think we've got 45% here and 5% there, 45% there and 5% there. So I don't think we need all this space right here. Maybe not quite that much. So I'm going to just show you what I mean here. So I'm going to go to responsive one start. And I'm just going to copy this style here and paste. And this time I'm going to change only the second column or the last column in whenever these two are together. What does that mean? If I look back at that page again, right, here's the first one, here's the second one. So I want to make this one not have this 5% margin over here on the right. But how do I do that? This is kind of a cool selector that I thought I'd throw out to you guys. So I'm going to do half width column colon last child. Sad, it's the last child. So what does this mean? This means that anything with a class of half width column, but it's the last one, the last child. Last child means the last child of the common parent. Who's the parent? The parent of this thing is the article, right? If we look back at our code, we've got, here's the div, right? Here is the beginning of it. Here's half width column. There's two of those, right? There's that one, and then there's this one. Their parent is, if I look down here at the bottom, is, see, here's the div, here's the half width column with the div, here's the article. So that's the parent. So what this style is going to affect is only the last one in this row, which is these two columns here. There's only two columns, so it would work on any number you wanted to. So this one I want to change the margin right to 0, because I don't want that margin on the right side of it. Preview it one more time here. I'm going to preview this guy. And then if I use my inspector, I'm going to right click on here and go to inspect element with Firebug. And then if I go over the first column, here it is. You see the yellow there. If I look over here, it says margin right of 5%. Right? So that's that yellow part. Then if I look over the second part, here's the second one, it says margin right of 0. So it did actually work. So this space is from something else. But what I wanted to show you is you could use that kind of selector to affect like the last element in a row. You can basically target any child inside of a row of columns like that. The first one, the last one, the middle one, whatever you want, and change them specifically. I could have put a class on it too, but this is sort of an elegant way to do it. It just takes the last column and removes the margin on that one. So then we're getting some space from something else. So we're going to not worry about that because we could fix that. Oh, yeah. One thing I did forget to mention that we were going to discuss, I said, is the advantages and disadvantages of this. So you probably have seen what the advantage is that we only have one file here, right? We're only looking at one HTML web page, but we can show it in many different ways. So other ways to handle this kind of thing is to have a separate mobile site and a separate desktop site. That's troublesome because you have to sort of keep up with two sets of content, and maybe one thing gets changed and you forget to change the other. It's just kind of a pain, and you're kind of designing and maintaining two websites instead of one. So that's the main one of the main advantages of responsive design is it's one website that's shown different ways depending on how it needs to show. A disadvantage would be some of the, especially with the frameworks that we mentioned, Bootstrap and Foundation, a disadvantage would be that these files have gotten pretty large and there's a lot of unnecessary kind of code in there that you may not use. You may not use all of those frameworks when you make a web page. For instance, if we did this layout with Bootstrap or Foundation, it would be much larger as far as the amount of code that is used. But you can sort of customize the code and make it smaller, but it does add some code. And the size of these responsive websites, the file size, the page weight, you might think of it as all the files put together, has kind of, I think, resulted in basically larger websites as far as longer download times, more files to download, more code to download, partly because of these frameworks. So that's a little bit of a downside, but generally the benefits outweigh the disadvantages, and it's a very popular thing for a reason. It's a very good thing that's going on as far as making websites accessible both on desktop and mobile browsers. Okay, so I think that is probably good for this one, and I will talk to you again next time.